government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Friday, the 29th day of February, 2008. We're going to be live here for the next 3 hours. We have a top economist, Mr. Roubini of the New York University's Stern School of Business, joining us. He was in the Financial Times of London last week with this headline, America's Economy Risks the Mother of All Meltdowns. And joining us is Professor Roubini. Sir, thank you for spending time.
A pleasure being with you today.
You've got the floor. Can you explain how we've gotten to this point and where you see the economy going with more and more bad news, leveraged debt, the states trying to get their money out of investments, just bottom line, in layman's terms, Professor, what are we facing?
In layman's terms, we're facing a pretty severe recession. In my view, the recession has already started when you look at all sorts of economic indicators, like there is no job creation, demand is falling, the housing recession is getting worse, the firms and the consumers are nervous about the future, inflation is rising. It's obvious that economic activity is contracting, and this is going to be a pretty severe recession. Last time around, we had a recession in 2001. It lasted only 8 months. I fear this is going to be a longer and more protracted recession that may last 12 to 18 months. So something very painful for jobs, for employment, for incomes, for consumption.
I know you're not political, but we need your analysis. President Bush comes out and says we're not even going into a recession and everything's wonderful. Is that them trying to shore up a panic, or what's happening?
Yeah, saying we're not in a recession is not accepting reality. You go around America and you ask people, they're worried about their jobs. They're worried that now inflation is eroding the value of their incomes. The price of gas is going up, the price of energy, the price of food, the price of all sorts of goods, and wages are not going up. So people are really being stressed. That's why consumption is falling. The value of the homes are falling. People cannot use anymore their home as an ATM machine and borrow against it. Oil is at $100 per barrel. Gasoline is going to be soon enough at $4 per barrel. You have now a slack in the labor market with job losses. Confidence is down for the consumers. You have a credit crunch in the mortgage market. Interest rates on consumer debt are going up. Americans and households are being pinched in a severe way like they haven't been for 20 years now.
Have we, since the 70s in my opinion, have we hit the wall, or will we hit the wall when everyone's maxed out and then we have all these cascading events coming together? Greenspan's telling the big oil producers, get out of the dollar, which it seems to me all we've got left is our fiat currency, sir.
You're right. We have many different problems. We have these very, very nasty problems in the credit market, and it's not anymore just a subprime mortgage problem because the rot has spread from subprime mortgages to near-prime mortgages to prime mortgages. And it's not just mortgages. You have now default rates rising for consumer credit, auto loans, credit card, student loans, and it's not just residential real estate. Now there's a beginning of a bust in commercial real estate, and then you have this problem you suggested of rising oil prices and rising inflation, and at the same time we have the weakening of the value of the dollar, and soon enough the foreigners might not want to buy our assets because they're losing value by buying things that are losing value in their own currencies because of the fall of the dollar. So we have a widespread of real economic and financial trouble ahead of us.
As an economist, as a forecaster, on the good side, how do you see this playing out? What, a 1, 2, 3 year recession? On the bad side, you talk about total economic meltdown. Can you talk about what the good side might look like from your past experience versus the bad side?
Well, for the time being, I'm quite pessimistic. I believe that this recession has already started and only started, so it's going to last longer than the previous two ones that lasted only 8 months. It's going to be more like 12 to 18 months. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, but it's going to be after we've had a massive increase in unemployment, losses of jobs, of incomes. These financial losses are going to spread from one part to the other of the credit markets and the financial system. On the good side is that now Washington is getting it and the Fed is getting it, so there is a stimulus with the Fed reducing interest rates quite aggressively. There's been a fiscal stimulus in terms of this package that was passed by Congress. But all these things are not enough because there are millions of houses that are now underwater. The value of their homes is less than the value of their mortgages, and therefore they have a huge incentive to walk away. We'll have to think about some policies are going to keep people in their homes and reduce the number of foreclosures, because potentially you have something like 15 to 20 million households who might be underwater and might essentially bankrupt and default on their mortgages. So we need a plan, and that plan is not yet in Congress on how to deal and avoid this massive tsunami of defaults and foreclosures ahead of us.
Well, you're a highly respected professor and PhD in economics, and a lot of your advice has been, heeded at least by some. What would you do that's different or added to what the current captains of the situation are doing?
There are several things you can do. We probably need not just to freeze the reset of some of the mortgages, but we need an across-the-board freezing of that. We need to stop foreclosures not just for 30 days, but probably for at least 6 months. We might need to change our bankruptcy laws in ways that the bankruptcy judge can cram down and force a reduction in the value of the mortgages as part of the restructuring of the debt of those who cannot pay their bills. So there are many things we can do in terms of trying to reduce the amount of financial distress for the households that are now going bankrupt or in foreclosure. That's what we need to do.
The Financial Times talks about the 12 stages. Can you mention some of the most important? How far into those 12 different events we are that could cause a meltdown? And what do you think the percentage chance is we're going to have a huge meltdown versus just a deep recession?
I worry about the financial meltdown because we've never seen such a severe crunch in financial and credit markets for the last 30 years or so. I'm not going to enumerate every step, but of those 12 steps, I think that the first one is that the housing recession is getting worse rather than better. Home prices are falling now at a rate that's going to be closer to 20% when everything happens. We have now these problems in mortgages spreading from subprime to near prime to prime. We have commercial real estate now being in trouble. We have consumer credit with auto loans, credit cards, and student loans being in trouble. We have all these leverage loans that finance all these leverage buyouts that are now getting in trouble. And most importantly, soon enough, many corporations are going to go bankrupt because they have lots of debt and they're going to start having losses. The rate of defaults by corporations in the last 2-3 years was very, very low, while in a typical recession it spikes to 15% of corporate bonds going into default. And when these corporates go into bankruptcy, then they fire workers, they don't invest. And that creates even more kind of negative effects on the economy. And finally, you'll have a very significant bearish market in equities that's going to happen in the next few months as we are going into a recession, and you'll have, fire sales of assets in distressed situations. So those are some of the important steps that lead to a systemic financial crisis.
Professor Roubini, did you see the Financial Times of London story 6 months ago where it said big central banks and the highest tier of the financial order actually stand to gain from this because they get to have that fire sale and consolidate up all the other banks and brokerage firms and stocks companies and just raw assets and commodities? Or is this a core crisis at the highest levels?
I think it's a core crisis at the highest levels because even some of the largest financial institutions have had dozens of billions of dollars of losses. The the biggest bank in the U.S., Citibank, or many of the other large broker-dealers have had massive losses, Merrill Lynch, Bear Stearns. So it's not just 200 subprime mortgage lenders have gone belly up and out of business. You have the risk that some major financial institutions might also go belly up. So it's really across the board.
From my understanding, in the early 1990s, we saw massive regulatory loosening of regulations to where banks could just basically certify their own loans, go way past the 1 to 10 rule of fractional reserve banking. Was it just greed that brought us to this?